Good evening, everybody, from the federal capital of Nigeria, Abuja. And good morning from North America and other parts of the world. Thank you for joining, wherever you're joining from. This is a Jacksonites Professional Development Series seminar, our 6th in the series. We can't believe that it's 6 months when we started this, and it has been sustained up to this moment. I want to thank everybody who has joined fresh today. Thank those who have been with us. We're quite grateful. Without you, we couldn't have come this far. I want to appreciate our global coordinator, Professor Mba, for her resilience and forthrightness. I want to appreciate Professor Okibo, our regular tutor, never shies away. I thank also our regular presenters here, Dr. Gabsiso, Dr. Adenira, and so many people who have been here. And I appreciate the new ones who are also going to add to what we are doing. It's my pleasure to say that today I will do the last part of the series. And I'm sure that in a couple of days or weeks, we'll also come with new things that will sustain this tempo. So once again, I welcome you all, and I assure you that we're going to be as brief as possible. We're hoping that in the next 1 hour, 30 minutes max, we should have been done with this. And for that reason, there are a few things we need to take note of in terms of our presentation timing, in terms of our response time to questions, and even the questions that will be asked. So we are hoping that we'll be able to keep to time so that every presentation will not exceed 12 minutes or 15 minutes maximum. And then the questions will also be as short as direct as possible, knowing that at the end of the program, we're going to send the materials to every participant. So that's one of the packages they will get soon after. So any questions that are not properly resolved, the answers will come in the package. So once again, thank you for joining. And as we move on, I want to just quickly read out our program of the day. I'm sorry we didn't put prayers here, but it should be we should have prayers here. We can just say that in our minds as usual. So, but beyond that, after this housekeeping, we're going to take a welcome address to be presented by Dr. Marcel Mbamalo. He's a member of our JPDS steering committee. That will be about 2-3 minute speech. And then we shall have a general overview review of our past seminars to be taken by Professor Nuhu Dabsiso. And then after that, the presentation proper will commence. We have done the presentation in this format. Dr. Rahimat Adeniro of Lagos State University will be coming first, then to be followed by Dr. Nuhu Dabsiso, University of Maiduguri. And then the third person that will present is Dr. Rukaya Aliyu from Bayero University, Kano. And then Dr. Karim Amaka Okibo from University of Chicago. And then Professor Rotimi Williams, Olatunji, Lagos State University. And finally, Professor Victor Ayedu Aluma, University of Jos. At the end of the last presentation, the questions and answers, as well as comments, will now take off. We hope that at the end of that, a vote of thanks by our PG student of mass communication, Ogochukwu Obobe. Sorry, I pronounced that name well. So that will be the run of today's event. How it's going to be. I'm happy to be moderating again. My name is Dr. Chuks O. Enwerem. I work for National Open University of Nigeria, the Department of Mass Communication. So welcome everybody. I assure you that it will be an exciting moment as usual, and we shall have something to go home with. So if we are ready, if my Dr. Marcel Mbamalo is ready, I want to be listening to his welcome address. Thank you.
I think he's muted. Marcel, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm sorry. kept going on and off. All right, so good evening, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the opportunity. I said good morning because it's morning here. Sorry, I said good evening because it's good evening here. It could be morning elsewhere. So we are welcome to the 6th edition of this project. And on behalf of Professor Patu Tommy, the president of the Worldwide Association of UNN Mass Communication Graduates, we call ourselves the Jacksonites, our executive committee, and all our members, I welcome you all to the 6th edition of this monthly webinars, which actually started with our analysis of fake news. The very first edition of this was the analysis that we all did, what we could call a global analysis of fake news that has become a global concern, not just in Nigeria, even in the US, all over the world. So that was our takeoff point. We have ever since then continued with this project uninterrupted, having a lot of experts, bringing experts together to talk about issues that are of very serious interest to students, to teachers, professionals, practitioners in different fields of endeavor. So in the last 6 months, we have actually provided basic theoretical and practical teachings on these areas I've mentioned, especially the strategic fundraising and capital campaigns. That was one of the first after our fake news discussion. And then we went on to talk about action research. We also looked at mixed methods research approaches, mixed method research approaches. We talked about qualitative methods. And then the 5th one was quantitative methods. Today we are here, we are looking at top 5 qualitative methods. And we are bringing our experts, very proficient in this field of endeavor, to do justice to it. If you like what you hear from them about the top 5 qualitative methods, then you should be able to come back on the first Friday of December to join us for the next webinar that will dwell on quantitative methods. Then we'll be dealing with top 5 quantitative methods of research. So these monthly webinars actually have taken a life of their own. And you can see that from the number of people that registered today. In fact, we had about 200 registrants today for today's webinar. And one striking thing about the registrations is that you have them from different countries of the world. In fact, it's global. US, in Africa, you have people from Zambia, you have people from Senegal, even I saw one from French-speaking country, Cote d'Ivoire. This is in English, but you see some, and different fields of endeavors, students, teachers, journalists, media practitioners, PR practitioners, different fields of endeavor. So we have a kind of diverse participation from diverse fields of experience and work. So, and you can see, okay, even filmmaking, I mentioned PR before, we have people in agriculture. Because for me, I believe that research is actually the key to everything. Research is the beginning and end of everything, because research answers questions that every management question, as I tell my staff here at Prime Business Africa, begins with question. You ask the right question, then you find solutions to every management problem. So for us to have solutions to issues, whether of governance, whether of practice in our fields of endeavor, we have to find answers to questions, and that is what research is all about. So our alumni association, we call ourselves the Jacksonites. We will continue to provide these monthly webinars. We have done that for 6 months uninterrupted. You know, and as long as there are participants who find them useful, we'll continue to do so. You know, in these areas that I mentioned earlier, teaching, communication practices, management consulting, engagements, all wherever whether you're engineering, software engineering, whatever, I think you are rightly here to participate in this program. So as Nigeria embarks on a historic political transition, which is actually very, very critical at this time, this topic can never be overemphasized. It is actually very, very timely and very useful to the exercise, because we would like to, you know, discuss issues that will be useful to journalists, political party stalwarts, and members of the public as they look at the issues culminating in the campaigns, the issues that will come after the campaigns, the election proper, and how things play out there. So this particular qualitative research method that we're going to look at today, you know, can be said to be very, very useful for us as we go into the 2023 elections. So in closing, I would want to thank the organizers once again. And then the expert panelists, I didn't mention their names, but you'll see them as they unfold here, very, very proficient in the areas they're going to speak about, and from different universities in Nigeria and in the US. I think I would say, I wish us very good, very, very profitable and rewarding deliberations as we move on. And then as I welcome us again for the next edition that is coming on the first Friday of December, 2022. Thank you very much. Long live University of Nigeria, SOCA. Long live the Federal Republic of Nigeria. You're all welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my chairman, for this occasion, for that brilliant presentation. I'm quite grateful. And on that note, I think we can now take off with the speed of light. I would like to call Professor Nuhu Gashiso to give us the general overview, review of our past seminars as in the program.
Thank you, Dr. Chuks. It's been a pleasure being part of this wonderful group, the Jacksonites. We've had a series of webinars, just like it was discussed by Mbamalu. We've had mixed method, webinar, action research, qualitative research, quantitative research method. And then today we'll be looking at the 4 most popular qualitative research methods. During all those sessions, we've had robust discussion cutting across all of these methods. It was quite engaging, it was quite enriching, and I'm sure all the PG students that were part of this webinar from the beginning to this time might have learned quite a lot. The challenge with most postgraduate students we've worked with is their lack of understanding or limited understanding of methodology. That has been a recurring problem, that has been a challenge. But we thank the Jacksonites for making the task easier for students that have been part of this webinar from the onset till now. In fact, the few ones we've interacted with have attested to the fact that they've learned quite a lot. Even colleagues have learned a lot. I've also learned a lot from this webinar series, which was spearheaded by our distinguished professor, Charles Okibo, who has mentored so many and is still mentoring quite a number of us today. We appreciate you, sir, and appreciate Professor Chinedu, who has been on our neck to ensure that we all take part and participate in this webinar. Our appreciation goes to the president of the Jacksonites and all members of the Jacksonites. It is my sincere prayer that as many people are joining this webinar, they will also tap from the reservoir of knowledge of these reputable professors that we have, especially the ones today. I know the 2 of them have learned quite a lot, I remember when Professor Ayedum was our external examiner in UNIMED, the year he came, all of us were on our toes and we learned quite a number of things from his expertise. I've continued to learn from him. Professor Rotimi, we've had interaction at different fora. I've learned also quite a lot from him. So I urge all who are watching to listen attentively as these distinguished scholars share their experiences, share their knowledge to us. At least even if we will not pick all, let us pick one or two things from today's presentation. I'm sure it will help us in writing our thesis, writing our dissertation in our respective institution. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for that short and brilliant piece. Thank you, everybody, for keeping faith with this. We are about to begin the main thing, and the presentations are 5 in number, actually 6, but the last one is jointly to be presented. So we have, like we said earlier, 10 minutes to 12 minutes or at the max. So we're looking at the first person to present is Dr. Rahimat Adeniro. She is of Lagos State University. As she takes her position, let me briefly say a few things about her. Rahimat Adeniro is actually a senior lecturer at the School of Communication, Lagos State University, Lagos, Nigeria. She holds a PhD in communication studies from Lagos State University. She has research interests in journalism studies, health communication, and misinformation studies. She was a 2020 fact-checking research fellow with Dubawa, Nigeria's first indigenous fact-checking organization. Among her most recent publications is AWAR, Cultural Issues Mediating the coverage of maternal and child healthcare experiences in the Nigerian press, in Public Relations Inquiry. That was where it was published. Welcome to the forum, Dr. Adeniro. Thank you for joining.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
You?
Am I clear enough?
Yes, you are.
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are listening from. Thank you so much to the organization, to the organizers of this event, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak at the platform. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So my presentation this afternoon will center around qualitative content analysis. And before I will go into what qualitative content analysis is in itself, I'll just give an overview of what content analysis is general as it is. So what is content analysis? Essentially, next slide, please. Next, it is about trying to understand. Am I still audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Okay. Content analysis is just about trying to examine, is one of the most common methods in the communication and media studies. So it's usually intended to build a model to describe a phenomenon in a conceptual form. So you are trying to analyze communication content in varied forms that you can imagine it. So whatever it is, whatever forms that you have communication content in, you can actually do a content analysis on it, whether be it on films, interview transcripts, social media content, publications, broadcast productions, and all that. So originally, content analysis was conceptualized as a quantitative study, and this is often premised on Berelson's 1952 book on content analysis. But over time, scholars have developed the need to recognize the need to actually do qualitative content analysis also, because that way you are able to actually look at the latent meanings or the latent and manifest content of a of the communication of the phenomenon you are trying to study. Essentially, content analysis involves any technique for making inferences by objectively and systematically identifying specific characteristics of messages. Next slide, please. So now, what is qualitative content analysis itself? It is usually employed to qualitatively describe manifest and latent meanings of communication content. This is about establishing relationship in the phenomenon of inquiry. So what I mean here is that what it is that you are trying to study, whether you are trying to look at things that can be as diverse as gender violence portrayals, maybe in movies, or elections are around the corner now. You might try to look at election speeches of politicians and try and see the kind of messages that they are trying to pass across, and just study whatever it is politicians are saying during this election period. So you might do any of those. Just so that could be your phenomenon of inquiry. Whatever it is that you want to study, you are trying to establish relationships between within that particular phenomenon, so that you can have a coherent report at the end of the day on your observance of the phenomenon. So the approach is dependent on the nature of the research. It could be inductive approach or the deductive approach. Inductive approach essentially involves when you are doing a study where there is fragmented or limited knowledge on the phenomenon. That is not much people, it's not a well-studied area in itself. So you're just trying to break new grounds in that particular study. And the idea is often can be used to develop theories from whatever it is that you found out in that particular research. But for the deductive approach, the analysis is often based on previous knowledge. You have a number of people that have done that particular study, and you're just trying to now apply that particular method in another scenario, in another environment, and observe whatever it is that you are, and observe your findings from it. So the purpose here is usually to test existing theories. Next slide, please. So the idea is that somebody had done that particular study and just want to, so it might even just be adopting the particular instrument that they had used to now try to do your analysis at the end of the day. So qualitative content analysis could be in form of, often involve 3 stages. You have the preparation stage, you have the organizing stage, and you have the reporting stage. At the preparation stage, next slide, please. At the preparation stage, you want to make sure that you have a good grasp of the phenomenon that you want to study. You understand what it is that you are looking out for. If you say you want to study political speeches during this election period, what aspect of the speeches are you looking out for? Is it just everything that the person says, or are you trying to see maybe just attack speeches that actually promote it in the polity and all that? So you have to be specific on, okay, what it is that I want to look out for. Am I just looking at everything that they said, or am I looking out for specific things that relate to whatever it is I want to study on? And you must have a clear unit of analysis, which is what it is that you want to study. Are you looking at the whole content, or you are looking out for specific ones, maybe issues of hate speeches, issues of false information that might be passed during these speeches, whereby they can make bogus claims on whatever it is that they have done, or claims about the opponent and things like that. So have a clear content of what it is that you want to achieve, or you want to study specifically. And you must decide on whether you are looking at the manifest content. What is it that you are seeing as it is? Or do you want to focus on the latent content, whereby you actually infer, or you try to make a judgment based on what it is that this person says, and try and give meaning to it that might not be obvious to the average listener or person. So the idea is that you must be able to experience the phenomenon, whatever it is that you want to study, you must be able to experience it. If you want to study those speeches, for instance, now, you might have to be willing, you must be willing to actually listen and watch those political speeches repeatedly. So when you watch those speeches repeatedly, you're able to have an insight of what it is that, you're able to have a grasp of and a general overview of what is being said, and say, okay, what are the things that I can make, what sense can I make out of all this? So depending on whatever it is that you want to analyze, you must be able to actually if it's a book, if you are looking at interview transcripts, for instance, that you want to analyze an interview, that is a couple of interviews that you have done regarding a study, you must be able to read that transcript over and over again. And at the end of the day, you must be able to critically evaluate the phenomenon. You're not just looking at it in a lame manner, just like the average reader. You want to look at it in a way that you're able to actually recognize occurrences that the average reader might not necessarily be able to pinpoint. And you must be able to make sense of the data and learn what is going on. And learn what is going on that and understand what is going on and decide out of everything. Next slide, please. So at the organizing stage, you have the inductive and deductive content analysis. At the organizing stage, you must be, whatever it is that you want to record from the phenomenon that you are trying to study, you must have a well outlined research questions or research objectives to guide the study, and realize that for the inductive, the approaches might differ based on whether it is the inductive or the deductive approach that you are settling for. For the inductive approach, you are trying to describe all the content of all the aspects of the content. Remember that in this approach, you are dealing with things that I don't have extensive knowledge of. They don't have extensive knowledge of written literature. So you are trying to say, okay, what exactly is it can I observe in this particular phenomenon, and try and create a description of it. Perhaps just note a phrase. Okay, this particular one, this is an hate speech. This is an instance of hate speech in this particular phenomenon. It's an experience of attack on the opponent. So you just describe what it is that you are observing as it occurs. Whenever you have another thing that pops up in the content that you are trying to analyze, you note it down. So at the end of the day, you have a number of coded category, coded descriptions of what it is that you are able to observe. Then, because the list might be so diverse, as it is now try to relate whatever it is that you are trying to observe and try and collate the related ideas into. So you try to, okay, this and this number 1 point and number 5 points here are more or less talking about the same, so they can still be grouped together. So you try to reduce the listed content, listed descriptive content that you have come up with in the process of analyzing or organizing whatever it is that you are trying to observe, and now try to bring it into a limited number of descriptive themes and things like that, descriptive themes, just to describe what it is that you are observing. So at the end of the day, you have a fewer listed categories or coded themes on that you can now use to describe the phenomenon in the appropriate manner. Then for the deductive content analysis, you are dealing with something that actually involved that somebody else might have done. It could be that you are for the election study now, for instance, you might want to look at, if you are looking at the speeches of politicians at election campaigns, this is for 2003 elections, you might want to, perhaps somebody else has done a similar study on 2019 election or an earlier election, or it could even be in another environment entirely. I look, okay, what are the kind of what did this person, what are the categories that this person came up with when they did the previous study? So you can now use those existing descriptions of the occurrence to now formulate your own. You look at, so those you form those categories based on the existing, what people had done earlier. So if you want to look at gender-based violence in movies, what have people done on gender-based violence? What have they observed previously? So you have those categories of people's description of the occurrences, and based on this, you now check for occurrences of it, whether before occurrences of it, if it occurs in your own phenomenon that you are currently observing. So you are able to now code these into categories based on what it is that you are observing. And essentially, you must be able to bring out examples of it in your description of it. You're able to bring out instances of those.
10 minutes gone. 10 minutes gone.
Current phenomenon. All right, sir. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I think the next slide is the reporting stage now. So at the reporting stage, realize that the study is subjective. You must be flexible in your approach. It is usually the researcher's prerogative to describe the occurrence the way he or she deems fit. And of course, it has to be based on very valuable knowledge that you can see around that. You're not just coming up with things that are out or with reality. It has to be based on existing knowledge also too. So that you have to be flexible in your approach. Ensure that you promote trustworthiness in your report so that people are able to see what it is that you have done. Have transparency in your research process. What exactly, describe in detail what you did and how you did it. And realize that you must include excerpts and descriptions of the phenomenon in your report. You must be able to, the formed categories has to reliably reflect the subject of the study. And if you had used others categorization, you have to ensure that you reference them appropriately so that you're not just presenting those categories as if you're the one that came up with it at the end of the day. So at the end of, next slide now presents a list of and examples of qualitative content analysis studies that I could find. So thank you so much. You can just go through it at your convenience for further details, please. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adeniro, for that. I think you were able to beat the time, 12 to 15 minutes. And that's what we really are targeting. Thank you once again. God bless you. Okay, going by our program, the next presenter will be Professor Nuhu Japsiso from University of Maiduguri. While he's preparing his paper, let me give out his citations, a brief one. Nuhu Dirasu Japsiso is an associate professor and head Department of Mass Communication, University of Maiduguri, Nigeria. He holds a PhD in mass communication and resides and lectures in Maiduguri. Nuhu's teaching and research interests are in public relations, media and human rights, print media, and new media. He's a member of the African Council for Communication Education, as well as the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria. He's a consultant to many NGOs and has served as a resource person and facilitator in several workshops in Nigeria, including this one we're doing. Nuhu has published widely in local and international journals. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Professor Nuhu Japsiso. Please take the stand. Thank you so much for coming, sir.
Thank you very much. My presentation today is on focus group discussion. Next slide, please. Focus group discussion, as the name implies, is a group interview, mostly on a given topic, and is normally led by a trained moderator. The goal is to provide useful insights into a topic. Sometimes there are topics that people hardly know stuff about. So what normally happens is if you engage in a focus group discussion, you get a lot of facts and ideas into that issue. Next slide. Next slide. The origin, history, and rationale, focus group. Focus group first started in the 1940s as a research method in the context of market research. In fact, it was done concerning radio soap operas during the Second World War by Robert Merton. What he did was to analyze the effectiveness of propaganda using focus group discussion. From there, Merton created an interviewing procedure to gain further insight into the subjective reaction of the participants. So the use of focus group gained popularity among sociologists in the 80s when Merton published a report on focus interviews. Next slide. Psychologist and marketing expert Ernest was the first to coin the term focus group itself before his death in 1991. Since then, it has been employed by marketers who realize that listening to and acting on clients' ideas, sometimes if they want to get insight into what their clients want, they do organize focus group discussion to enable them have an idea of what particular product the client want, how to improve the product so that it will increase their sales. Next slide. Why focus group discussion? Focus group discussion is frequently used as a qualitative approach. Like I mentioned earlier, the aim is to gain deeper understanding of social issues. It could be rape, it could be crime, and the rest of them. Next slide. What are the purpose of focus group discussion? One is the fact that it encourages and promotes interaction among participants. You give the participants the opportunity to share their feelings, to share their experiences without interruption. Then secondly, data generated through social interaction of the group are normally deeper and richer because you give people the opportunity to say their mind so they can tell it under an atmosphere that is free, that is not heated, so they can open up and share their feelings, share their experiences without any interruption. Then thirdly, it does not discriminate against people who cannot read or write. You mustn't write before you participate in an FGD. That is why focus group can be organized and conducted in local languages. Then you translate whatever the speakers have said so that others can read and then make sense out of the data. Then fourthly, it encourages participation from people. There are people that will naturally be reluctant to open up and say anything, even during interviews. So with focus group discussion, you give them the opportunity to participate and then to share their feelings, to share their ideas with others. Then the fifth point is the costs are relatively low compared to other research tools. You don't spend so much, unlike questionnaire that you print questionnaire, you do pre-test, you do this one, you organize a number depending on the type you're using from 5 up to 12. So you find a convenient place where they'll be seated with a moderator. They start and then they set their ground rules and then they kickstart the process without much stress. Next slide. It is also possible to construct FGD in quantitative and mixed versions, according to Johnson and Turner 2003. So you could also use it in mixed method. You could also use it in quantitative method, though it's not so popular. Focus group are considered best used in qualitative method of data collection. I've never used it in quantitative method, but I know I've used it in qualitative. Then it is also flexible. It is flexible. You can decide on the number that you want to conduct your FGD. It is very rich because people will share their feelings, share their experiences, and you take into consideration their action, their reaction in arriving at a conclusion based on the data that you're gathering. Then it has different advantages. It's an important method to collect qualitative data. Next slide. Like I said earlier, there are so many types of FGD. The first one is a single focus group, and it involves a single moderator asking questions and organically discussing a topic with a small group of respondents. Like I said, it could be 5, it could be 4. So the advantage you have here is you can interact more with a few number than it is with many numbers. Then the second type is the dwelling moderator focus group. This one is unlike the first one, it has 2 moderators. What this one does is it pits one moderator against another, so that if this one is asking questions, the other one will be providing the answers. So it has advantage because one will be asking and the other will be responding. Then another example is a mini focus group, which has 4 or 5 respondents. I've already discussed that. Then the next one is 2 focus group. You have separate focus group in a given place, and each has its own moderator. Sometimes issues will be raised by the other group, and the other group would also raise a different issue. That way you get different viewpoints from different focus groups within the same location. Next slide. Then you have the dual moderator focus group. What they do in this type of group is the fact that 2 moderators can collaborate in this type of focus group. They can handle same topic, but the fact is the ideas that will be generated may not be the same. So it is quite rich, it is quite engaging. Then the next type is the respondent focus group, where you have 1 or more of the focus group respondents. What they do is normally among the respondents, one will temporarily assume the role of a moderator, moderating what others are saying. So the advantage is it encourages participation by respondents in the given focus group. Then there's yet another one. It's not possible to get all respondents in one place. So you can also use teleconferencing. You can also use video conferencing, which is an online format, to gather participants from different locations. However, it is a bit restrictive because sometimes they may not even appear on camera. So the tendency for you to have a personal interaction with them would not be there. So, but it's also good when you cannot get all the respondents in the location where you are, you can do it online. It will still generate data, but it may not be as rich as the other types that we've identified and discussed above. Next slide. Then there is another type, remote focus group. Of course, we've discussed that one. Next slide. Then there are specific types of FGD groups. One is the natural group, then the other one is the expert group. The natural group consists of multiple participants who will belong to different informal and formal groups. Example that I gave is family, kin, co-workers, elderly group, women's group, self-help group, neighborhood club, teachers credit association prior to the study. So, but in the expert group, this consists of people who are knowledgeable in certain fields. They have experience in certain areas, so you could engage them during FGD. For instance, if it has to do with certain infections, you can get nurses, you can get doctors, then you can also talk to ambulance drivers and even drug store vendors. So you could also engage lawyers, you could also engage even journalists. Next slide.
10 minutes gone.
So participants in FGD, who should be your participants in an FGD? Multiple participants who share one or some common characteristics would do. Then secondly, participants can be selected to participate in a focus group based on a transparent criteria, such as 1, you look at how knowledgeable they are in that area. then 2, life experience, then 3, particular characteristics, and then their role in a group or community. Next slide. Selecting FGD participants. 1, in choosing them, you consider the following qualities: people who can articulate specific knowledge. Secondly, feel comfortable. Those that will feel comfortable sharing their knowledge in a group, small group setting. Then those that can engage in a discussion on aspects of this knowledge. Those that cannot engage in discussing their aspect of knowledge should be excluded. Then you also choose people that can demonstrate mutual respect for others, giving them the opportunity to speak, allowing them to talk when is their chance to talk, not people that will dominate the entire discussion, disallowing others from opening up to say their mind. Next slide. How is it used? FGD can be used when you need to understand an issue at a deeper level. When you want more insight into an issue, you could use focus group than a survey, because it helps in adding meaning and understanding to a knowledge that you already, a prior knowledge that you have. You also get to know why and how of a particular topic. Next slide. Then keys to a successful FGD. You can see in this picture where you have the participant, the moderator is asking questions in a natural setting. The respondents are also responding. They are
2 more minutes,
feeling
sir.
comfortable in his presence.
2 more
Yes?
minutes.
Okay,
2 more minutes.
next slide. Conduct of FGD. How do you conduct FGD? The quality of an FGD depends on the experience and skills of the moderator. So if you have a skillful moderator, he can be able to elicit a lot of responses and ideas. Then 2, his role is to ensure that the discussion topic is clearly introduced and thoroughly addressed. Not only introducing it, but it must be addressed by the respondents. Then that the discussion is balanced and inclusive. Every member of the group is allowed to contribute, not allowing one person to dominate the discourse. We had an experience in Kaga where once the leader speaks, everybody keeps quiet. They align themselves with what the leader has said. So avoid such a scenario. Then the moderator should also avoid dominating the group by expressing his opinion, expressing his view, expressing his own judgment. You should allow the participants to say what they want to say. Your role there is to moderate. Then the moderator should also be able to establish a group dynamic where participants can discuss topics from the discussion guide among themselves. Next slide. Then conduct of FGD, a typical session, you start with the discussion with an icebreaker, example, a round of introduction by participants, then introduce the main topic and the overall research question orally or on a poster or a projector, then ask specific questions listed in the discussion guide, not necessarily in the pre-specified order. Then when you are done, thank participants and say goodbye. Thank you.
Okay, these are the examples of what you have presented. So thank you so much, Professor, for that brilliant one. You also conducted it within the allowed time, 15 minutes. God bless you. Okay, I think we can move to the next presenter. At this time, Dr. Rukaya Aliyu from Bayero University is the next person to present. While she's coming on, let me also read her citation. Rukaya Yusuf Aliyu is a senior lecturer in the Department of Information and Media Studies, Bayero University, Kano. She holds a PhD in mass communication from the same university. Her areas of research interest span across media, press freedom, media law and ethics, health communication, and recently gender and online journalism. She's a member of a number of national and international professional associations, and she's well published. Welcome on board, Dr. Aliu. And thank you
very
for
much,
coming.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. I really appreciate that I'm part of this very distinguished team, and I hope that it's going to be beneficial to all of us. So thank you once again. And to the Jacksonites, honestly, I feel I'm already thinking of starting something like that for University of Maiduguri at BUK. I thank God HOD University is here, Moscow. So honestly, I'm really thinking if we could come up with something like this, I think it will benefit a lot of people. So my presentation is on in-depth personal interview. Sorry, can we go to the first slide? The cover slide. Yeah, my presentation is on in-depth personal interview. Next. So what is it when we talk about in-depth personal interview? What does it mean and how is it conducted? Basically, these are the things I'm going to be talking about during this presentation. And on the first slide, I have that it's a qualitative method for data collection, because we know that we have quantitative and qualitative methods of data collection, and we have so many techniques under them. So qualitative, it's in-depth interview is a qualitative method, and it's a discovery-oriented method to obtain detailed information about a topic from eligible respondents. Basically, when you talk about issues that you need to use in-depth interviews to uncover, you find out that they bother around issues of behavior, issues of attitude, perception, and the likes, because there are things that ordinarily you realize that not in all instances or not in all circumstances that quantitative data could unveil such information or data for you as a researcher. So it aims at exploring in-depth responses, especially of experiences, feelings, perceptions, perspectives, and opinions of respondents on the subject matter of research. For example, if you're doing a research that you feel the main method for data collection should be, let's say, it should be survey, and it should be like you're going to administer questionnaire quantitatively that you're going to get, you find out that most of the time there are information or data that cannot be fully uncovered when you use purely quantitative methods. Sometimes you realize that you have to use qualitative methods to further complement your qualitative data so that it will give explanation to just the numbers. Many a times, especially to us, social scientists and those of us in the humanities, you find out that data in quantitative manner do not really make much sense to us. It makes more sense, or they make more sense when you put or when you add a qualitative aspect to it, because it explains the numbers that quantitative gives. So this, I'm talking in the context of mixed method research. Of course, you can do purely quantitative study and you can do purely qualitative study. But in mixed method, it's saying that the shortfalls of a quantitative method could now be addressed, or the gap will be filled by qualitative methods that you're going to use together in the mixed method. So I also said it's called qualitative interviewing. It means it's interviewing that got to do with question and answer session, that the researcher or the interviewee talks to ask questions, throw his questions to the interviewer. Sorry, the interviewer throws his questions to the interviewee while he responds. And it doesn't just stop at that. You have to go further. You have to probe. You have to ask questions from the responses that the interviewee gives you when you ask any question. Next slide, please. So why in-depth interview? I said in-depth interview is important because it is one of the most viable means of gathering primary data in an in-depth and enormous manner. This is to say that when you're using in-depth interview, it doesn't just stop as peripheral data. but it goes deeper. This is why I said you have to ask questions from the answers that are given to the questions you ask. This is because you want the data to be very rich and you want to answer some of the issues that are unclear in the responses that your interviewee gives. Then the in-depth interview answers the how and so what in research. You find out that the 5, if you like, we could use the 5 W's and H in research. The first 4 W's could be answered by quantitative method, while the what and the why, sorry, this should be why, not what. The why and the how are answered naturally by qualitative methods, such as in-depth interviewing. In-depth interviews are often used to provide context to other data gathering techniques, offering a more complete picture of the why and the how to the data collected. This is just what I explained. I said, for example, if you conduct a research on, let's say, uptake of COVID-19 vaccination among youths or among women, for example, let's say in Kano Metropolis, you find out that you might just, at the end of the day, when you administer, of course, it's a large population and you have to do a survey by administering questionnaires and what have you. You find out that at the end of the day, you might not really get beyond numbers and peripheral reasons. So for you to answer deeply why this techniques like in-depth interviews, so that subject matter of research, so that they will further explain why the data is the way it is. Next slide, please. Next slide. Then how in-depth interview is used. I said primarily it provides deep explanations to situations from the perspective of the interviewee. For example, unlike administering questionnaires that in survey, you find out that you could be just you could just administer to anybody that is eligible within the sampling size you have already you calculate. You find out that when you're to do in-depth interview, it can't be just anybody. It has to be someone that has something to offer or to add value to the research you are trying to do or to the data you are trying to collect. And therefore, this is why you have to carefully select your participants for or your interviewees for in conducting in-depth interviews. And basically, there are not many because of the enormous and large nature of the information or the data you gather in the course of doing an in-depth interviews. So it is often used to provide context to other data gathering techniques, offering a more complete picture of why and how the data is the way it is. I explained this earlier that quantitative methods will only give you numbers which might not really make much sense, which might not really make complete sense to people that are reading, or even to you, the researcher. And therefore, you need to go further to dig to see from a qualitative perspective why the data is the way it is. And therefore, this is when you could use techniques like in-depth interviewing, or focus group discussions, or any other of the methods, depending on the need of the research. And I also said in-depth interviews are mostly long and engaging. This is because you're collecting a very large sum of data and you engage the personality in such a way that you tap all the information you want to tap during the interview or for the research. For example, if you're interviewing a personality, as in using in-depth interview as a technique in your research, you find out that sometimes he might even uncover some of the things that the research initially did not talk about, or initially did not identify as important to uncover. So it is in-depth, it is engaging because you take that person along, and while he answers your questions, you now throw more questions to him, trying to make him explain some of the things he said in his responses and what have you. I also said it provides a conducive environment for the interviewee. This is to tell you that when you're conducting in-depth interviews, it has to be very, very conducive, the environment for your interviewee, because if someone is not comfortable, is not he doesn't have that trust for you as a researcher, you find out that he might decide to keep some of the vital information that you need for the research. But when the environment is very, very conducive, when the person is, this tell you that when you're doing such, when you're planning such an interview, you have to give detailed information and knowledge of the research and reason why you are carrying out the research and why you are doing that in-depth interview with that personality, so that he will be convinced that he is adding value to to scholarship or an academic endeavor. Then I said it's used when figures cannot suffice. When you collect data qualitatively, mostly what you get is real. Let's say, for example, if you're doing content analysis and your design is that it's going to be quantitative content analysis, you find out that there will be a lot of queries after the research or after the data has been analyzed, because basically what the data will be offering is not more than numbers. This is the number against this. This is the difference between this and that. But naturally, people will try to ask, why are these figures like this? So it's only quantitative data or quantitative techniques like in-depth interview that could unveil or those information that statistics or numbers could not readily provide as a method or a technique in data collection. Next slide.
10 minutes gone. Thank you.
Okay, so there are steps in conducting in-depth interviews. This is to tell you that in as much as it's a qualitative method, it's also systematic, it's scientific, and it has to be well coordinated. First, you have to develop a sampling strategy. Who are eligible to be part of your in-depth interview? You have to identify these people based on the peculiarities and based on the needs of your research. Then you draft in-depth interview guide. You find out that the guide is mostly used to moderate and guide your interview, because along the line you have to probe, you have to ask questions, and you have to ask follow-up questions as the interviewer and as the interviewee gives responses to your questions. Then conducting the interview. Conducting the interview means when you, after identifying the people that are eligible to be part of your study, then you draft the guide questions that you're going to use in conducting the interview. Then there has to be the conduct of the interview, which include providing a conducive environment for the interview to take place, having informed consent of your interviewee, and also providing him with all the necessary information or queries, answers to the queries that he might have as far as your technique and the research is concerned. Then conducting the interview also entails having to sit down, ask in a question and answer mood while you ask the question and you get responses. And this technique is basically one-on-one, unlike focus group discussion that you gather a group of 8 to 12 people and talk to them at once, and you find that the responses of others might even motivate others to open up or talk. So then after collecting your data, then you also have analyzing the data collected. This will depend on your design of how you want to analyze the data, which is basically largely determined by the research and the researcher, of course. Next slide. Then examples. I said in-depth interview, for example, where you could conduct in-depth personal interviews. I said it could be conducted with media managers to understand the safety measures they put in place to ensure safety of their reporters covering conflicts. Another example here is that in-depth interviews with health workers to complement data on knowledge, attitude, and practice towards the object of COVID-19 vaccination among youths in Kano State. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr.
Yes.
Aliyu. You've done very well. You just did it exactly at 13 minutes. Thank you for saving our time and doing it exactly like that.
Thank you, sir.
So, yeah, that's great. We're moving on now to one of our newest entrants into this seminar series. She is Dr. Karen Amaka Okibo. And let me briefly say a few things about her. Karen Okibo is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy. Broadly speaking, her research is on the areas of immigration, race, ethnicity, and sociology of the family. Her current work focuses on intermarriage and endogamy among second-generation Nigerian Americans and explores their marital decision-making processes. She holds a doctorate in sociology from the CUNY Graduate Center, a master's in social policy from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's in sociology from North Dakota State University, and a bachelor's in politics from Princeton University. Maka also teaches. She has teaching experience at CUNY and University of Chicago, as well as the training of New York civil servants in social science research methods. She has an MPhil and a certificate in demography. We are pleased to have you, and then we welcome you to this podium the first time, and thanks for coming.
Good morning from the US and from an overcast and very windy Chicago. And thank you for that kind introduction and for the invitation to participate in this seminar. While I'm a mixed method researcher, I'll be speaking to you all today about ethnography. So what exactly is ethnography? If you can put the slides up, please. Thank you. To answer this, it's helpful to know a bit about the history of ethnography. Historically, ethnography originated in the fields of anthropology and sociology in the early 1800s. The roots of ethnography can be traced back to a colonial era when anthropologists and sociologists were recruited to help explore places, people, and cultures outside of Europe in regions in the global South and Asia. The primary focus of ethnographic studies was to study people and cultures in European colonies, and the goal was to use those detailed written descriptions and records, as well as photography and audio recordings too. During those early years of ethnography, ethnographers typically spent months and occasionally years conducting research, during which they were tasked with maintaining a detached and objective stance from the participants from whom they were observing. Being detached or objective meant that these ethnographers and researchers were supposed to observe individuals without getting their beliefs or their values influencing their findings. However, many scholars and critics have noted that this approach relied very heavily on a researcher's ability to describe and explain communities in richness and complexity. So that means that this method was often influenced by a researcher's preconceptions or prejudices, and it also allowed for them to infuse that into the work if they weren't careful and if they weren't systematic in their approach. So historically, ethnographers were seen as the sole authority on these new and interesting cultures that they were observing. But more importantly, the conclusions that they drew had long-lasting political and societal impact and consequences, some of which are still felt today. So today, ethnography can primarily be defined in three ways, which are listed here. First, it can be defined as a research method central to knowing the world from the standpoint of its social relations. That means that the ethnographer places themselves and embeds themselves within the social relations of a specific society. A second definition is that ethnography is a descriptive study of a particular human society or the process of making such a study. This means that it's not only just an arbitrary description of a people or a society, but that there's a systematic manner in which these methods are being conducted. And finally, ethnography can be defined as the systematic study of individual people and cultures. So ethnography spans the gamut from a micro level study of an individual or a family or a small kinship unit, and it can also range to a large societal or global study. Next slide, please. So how do we use ethnography? Ethnography remains one of the most popular qualitative methods because it allows the researcher to fully immerse themselves in the community or the group that's being studied. And it provides them the opportunity to have firsthand and in-depth experience of what it's like to be a part or a member of that culture. As I mentioned in the previous slide, in the historical context, ethnography remains a branch of research in sociology and anthropology, and it continues to serve as a systematic study of individual cultures and societies. Ethnography explores cultural phenomena from the point of view of the subject of the study, and it also is a type of social research that involves examining the behavior of participants in a given social situation and understanding the group members and the dynamics, and also providing the interpretation of such behaviors from the standpoint of the ethnographer. Fundamentally, ethnography is a qualitative research method, which we've heard a lot about today, and it's predicated on the diversity of culture within a society. Ethnography is a type of social science research, as I mentioned, that examines the behavior of participants in a given social situation. So it's not just based on one's words, but it also deals with their actions and their behaviors. As a qualitative method, the primary focus is on the quality of descriptive data collected. So ethnography is less focused on issues of quantifying or aggregating data, which I think you'll hear a lot more about with the quantitative seminar next month. Next slide, please. So what are the key components of ethnography? There are two overarching types of ethnography that are usually conducted. One is descriptive and the other is critical ethnography. The first type, descriptive ethnography, is as objective as it gets. It describes ethnography. It's in descriptive ethnography, the researcher uses a variety of research techniques to accurately capture objective reality through observation, through interviews, through research memos and diaries, through document analysis, photography, and even videos. These tools help provide high validity and reliability to what's actually being observed by the ethnographer. The second type of ethnography is critical ethnography. And in critical ethnography, the researcher is interested in giving voice to the less privileged individuals within a society. So the goal of critical ethnography is less about descriptive narratives, but it's more value laden. It deals with advocacy and advocating for social change. So this was historically used in the first wave of feminist advocacy when female scholars were championing equal rights for women. Within these two fields, these two types of descriptive and critical ethnography, there are two overarching types, there are three key components of ethnography. The first is listed here, participant observation. Participant observation requires a researcher to engage with people in as many different situations as possible to observe what people say and do in their everyday lives. I previously mentioned how important it is that ethnographers not only capture what people say, but also their behaviors and the patterns of behaviors that they enact in their everyday lives. The second is in-depth interview. Professor Aliyu did an outstanding job of describing in-depth interviews, so I won't go in depth into this, but I'll simply remind you that in-depth interviews involve conducting intensive individual interviews with a small number of respondents to explore their perspectives as a way of getting their ideas on a particular program or situation or issue. And the third type is focus groups. So Professor Gapsiso also did a wonderful job of describing focus groups. So I'll simply remind you here that a focus group is a demographically diverse group of people assembled to participate in a guided discussion about a particular issue. Next slide, please. So one way to explore what ethnography actually looks like in real terms is to give an example of how it can be used in the Nigerian election, for example. So election campaigns provide good research sites for using ethnography. Usually journalists tend to be the ethnographers for election campaigns, and they do this because they tend to be immersed in covering elections, and they ideally should be objective observers and nonpartisan commentators on what's happening in the election campaigns. In a way, they can be viewed as firsthand ethnographers who provide instant analysis and interpretations of election campaigns. The unfolding 2023 Nigerian presidential campaign, which started in September and will end with the presidential election in February, presents unique opportunities for not only journalists, but for researchers as well, to immerse themselves in the daily happenings of what political candidates are saying, what they're doing, and more importantly, what they're not saying and what they're not doing, and how these reactions and their interpretations can help guide and shape how individuals vote and decide on a political candidate. In the US, journalists and ethnographers as well are embedded in election campaign organizations in order to provide hour-by-hour reporting on the candidates. Ideally, these practices could be applicable in the Nigerian context as well, because what they ultimately seek to do is to enlighten the electorate to decide on voting behaviors based on facts and party platforms. And the best way to understand what a candidate really is about and what their platform really is about is by seeing not only their words, but their actions and their continued behaviors. So communication researchers should find ways to use ethnography and other relevant qualitative methods as a way of examining the use of communication during this election. And one way to do this is by conducting ethnographic research. So the first key step in ethnographic research is to define the problem, identify what the problem is. Second is to choose the research site or the field site. Third is to gain access to this particular site. And fourth is to choose and sample key informants. So individuals within this research site that have a deeper understanding of what's actually going on within this context. And then from there, you're able to then gather and collect data. And this can be in the form of audio recordings, video recordings, interviews that have been transcribed, and then you transcribe and interpret the data. And then the final step is to analyze and interpret the data. And these days, when you're conducting analysis of qualitative data, you can use software like Atlas TI or NVivo or Deduce. And some of these have annual subscriptions, which universities can help supplement, but sometimes you can also do a monthly plan if you'll need it only for a few months. So for instance, Deduce charges students $11 a month for their software and $15 a month if you're part of an organization. And so one way you can conduct ethnography in terms of the upcoming election is by conducting participant observation, by following presidential candidates as they campaign for office. So noticing and observing their behaviors, what they're saying in the speeches, what they're saying when they're talking to their constituents, but also what they're not saying, things that are being omitted from their public discourse. Another thing that you can conduct is in-depth interviews. So speaking with individuals and understanding not only why they're choosing to support a candidate or not support a candidate, or their views on certain important issues and key issues of concern. And a third way is by conducting a focus group. So gathering a demographically diverse group of people to hear their opinions and also to hear the discourse between them as they share their opinions and any differences. Next slide, please.
We've done 10 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I will end with references here. So listed on this slide are some references of sociological works that have used ethnographic methods. And while these references are invaluable in providing clear understanding of ethnography, I firmly believe that the best way to really hone your skills as a researcher and as an ethnographer is to simply go out and conduct your own ethnography. Everyone can be an ethnographer. The world is your research site, so I urge you all to go out and become ethnographers by trying these methods out yourselves. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Amaka, Karen Okibo, for that brilliant presentation within the specified time of 13 minutes. We appreciate you. By the way, I assume that the connections will have been made by participants. If you didn't make the connection between Karen Amaka Okibo and our own Professor Charles Okibo, let me clarify that Karen is the daughter of Professor Charles Okibo, And we are so happy to have her this evening to do what the father has been doing so greatly. And I want to mention that Okibo has just given us a message, a very strong message, particularly to our political class, supporting the idea that success without successors is actually not very successful. And the fact that she has given us this simple but very brilliant presentation attests to the fact that Okibo has actually succeeded in giving us somebody almost as good as himself. So thank you, Karen, for this one. And on that note, I want to bring to the table or to the podium Professor Rotimi Olatunji, who is going to be speaking to us in the next couple of minutes. And before I do that, let me introduce him. Professor Rotimi Williams Olatunji is of the Faculty of Communications and Media Studies, Lagos State University, Nigeria. He holds BA First Class Honors in Archaeology from Obafemi Awolowo University, Ife, and an MA and PhD degrees also in Communication and Language Arts from the University of Ibadan. His focus include communication research methods, advertising, public relations, economy and societies, political communication, entertainment media, health communication, and consumer studies. He has 22 years of university level teaching, research, and community service, along with nearly 100 research publications in reputable outlets. He is associate registered advertising practitioner and member Nigerian Institute of Public Relations and member Nigerian Academy of Letters. Welcome, Professor Olatunji, to this platform. Thank you so much, sir, for coming, and God bless you for enriching us. We want to hear you now.
Thank you, Chooks. And thank you to the organizers of this program for having me this evening here in Nigeria, and I guess afternoon in the US. I want to appreciate Professor Charles Okigbo for compelling me to be here, as he should do. He's my mentor, and I've been learning a lot from him. Today, the discussion will be on historical data and communication and media research. And there are two angles to this presentation. Go to the next slide. Next slide. I will be talking of the part one of it, which is historical data sourcing and significance in research. I'm talking on historical data and communication research method. Go to the next slide. This is the menu that I will be serving this evening. I may not need to go through that. As I unfold, we will see all of that. Go to the next one. Historical research. What really is historical research? The previous speakers have discussed extensively on the different forms of qualitative research methods. But quite interestingly and unfortunately, most of us in communication tend to shy away from historical research. I want to submit this evening that one of the best ways of studying communication is to go through the historical research method approach. In point of fact, it encompasses all the other different qualitative research methods that we have discussed this evening, and we are going to see how it plays out at the end of the day. What really is historical research? The basic goal of historical research is what we call reconstruction of events, of activities that had occurred in the past. And so there's the question of, is history an art or a science or both? When you look at the scientific research method that talks about the systematic thinking strategy and approach of data gathering, analysis, and interpretation so as to solve specific problems, you will see that historical research also dwells on the historical and the scientific approach of gathering data. The goal of historical research is reconstruction. And what we do is we want to be able to solve problems of society. And somebody said, where is knowledge after Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, and so on and so forth? Or put it differently, the scripture will say that there is nothing new under the heaven or on earth, which means that the patterns we see in society today are likely patterns or trends that we have observed over time. And what can we learn from the past activities so that we can be able to approach the challenges of the contemporary? For example, during COVID-19, we woke up to realizing that COVID is not altogether new. We have had occurrences of such epidemics in the past. And so if we glean lessons from the past, we had opportunity of learning how to combat COVID-19 when it broke. Face masks and so on and so forth were part of the traditions of the past. So in historical research, we do systematic collection, objective evaluation of data relating to past occurrences so as to gain understanding concerning what we call the causative factors, causes, effects, trends, consequences, and that we are able to provide solutions to particular problems and then anticipate or prevent such problems in future. And so historical research is as valid as other forms of research, but it is not absolutely scientific, nor is it absolutely an art. So it is both an art and a science. The next slide. Okay, I have tried to explain the purpose of historical research in my intro. There are different purposes. One, you want to find out about past activities or events in any area of life. Is it about a society? Is it about media? Is it about politics? Is it about economy? What are the past activities? And how have the people that handle such activities in the past, how have they responded to handling it? And what lessons can we learn from those that have handled the problem in the past? And so there are several purposes. For example, the causative factors. We want to find out the cause and effect relationship. If you're talking of the World War, what caused the First World War? What are the consequences? Then you can repeat the same thing for the Second World War. And if you want to prevent a global war again, what must we do to forestall such occurrences? So we also study what we call relationships between what had happened in the past and what is happening now for the purpose of avoiding unpleasant experiences of the past. Of course, we do record and evaluate accomplishments of individuals and societies in the past so that we can forge a way forward. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Now, let's look at typical research, historical research themes. As I mentioned earlier on, most of us in communication, we are so wary of going into historical research, more so because we don't know what area to probe into and how to identify research problem and how to go about it methodically. But there are different areas of historical research that we can encourage our students to go into. For example, I've identified a history of the daily times of Nigeria. Those of us who are media scholars, we know the strategic importance of the daily times of Nigeria and the origin of it and so on and so forth. Somebody can be interested in such an area of study and want to do any of the media organizations. Could it be the Guardian newspaper? Could it be the Punch? Could it be NTA? Apart from journalism or broadcasting generally, you can pick a particular medium of our trade and look at the history, look at the trends and so on and so forth. If not that, you can look at your specific profession or area of communication. I can want to look at history of public relations in Nigeria, history of advertising in Nigeria, history of broadcasting, and so on and so forth. So it is limitless. Of course, we can go into biographies. I just refer to Professor Shobowale's Unexpected Turns That is an area that you can also look at. Speeches of leaders, as mentioned by Dr. Adenina the other time. You can do comparative media history, as we have seen from legendary works of scholars in that area. What about technology, history of the telephone, and so on and so forth? I have mentioned two examples here, Olatunji 2011, newspaper cartoons and the portrayal of human rights abuses in periods of economic deregulation. What I did there was that I tried to reconstruct the history of the structural adjustment program in Nigeria through the art presentations of our artists, our cartoonists in daily times, and so on and so forth. And it makes an interesting reading. If you go through such cartoons, you can almost reconstruct the history of the structural adjustment program and the abuses of human rights. Currently, my PhD candidate is working on press freedom in Nigeria, comparative analysis of Goodluck Jonathan and Buhari, and it's also adopted the historical approach. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, the basic steps that we follow in historical research are as identified and itemized here. One, you have to bury yourself in library activities, select a problem area, provide background, and then you narrow the topic. Should you look at history of newspaper organizations in Nigeria, or you want to look specifically at the Daily Times or at the Guardian newspaper? And then after you have done that, you design your instrument, whether it is interview and so on, and then you identify the data, and after the data identification, you go out to gather the data, you analyze the data, you interpret it, and then in writing, you develop a thesis, and then you write. Professor Aluma is going to be talking on historical reconstruction and report writing. Please go on to the next slide. Thank you. Now, the main issue that I want to pinpoint today is data sources in historical research. And there are two basic data in historical research. One is primary, the other one is secondary. When we are discussing data in historical research, we should not have a one-on-one translation of our mindset about quantitative data. In quantitative data is quite different from what we discuss in historical data. One, primary data. These are data that offer first-hand testimony of an event. And we will see when we begin to evaluate primary data sources that the closest the data are to the event that occurred, the more reliable such data are. The more primary, the more basic, and the more relevant to the event in terms of date or to the event, the more valid that data is, or set of data are. Secondly, the data are raw materials of history. I said people make history without knowing they are making it. Their day-to-day life activities are basically historical. So they leave traces of their activities without knowing what others that are coming behind will do with the data. And that is what it is with primary data. Secondary one are derived from narratives based on the primary data. For example, if Professor Idowu Showale wrote his own the biography or account of the Nigerian Civil War as a journalist, that is closest to the source of information because he actually participated and covered the Nigerian Civil War. It is different from somebody else who is writing about the Nigerian Civil War as an historian who is just reconstructing based on the other data of those who actually witnessed the war. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, now let me now focus on primary data in historical research. There are two.
Sir.
What?
12 minutes gone.
My voice is gone. 10 minutes
12
gone.
minutes. You spent
Okay,
12 minutes,
okay, okay. Two primary data will refer to material data, non-material. For example, when we have photographs of the past, that's primary. You have architecture and so on and so forth. These are material. Others can be oral history, or interviews of those who witnessed an event, and so on and so forth. Handbooks, dictionaries, and so on are primary data. Go to the next one. Next one, secondary data. Okay, these are indirect data, as it were. Research articles, textbooks, biographies, and so on. Go to the next slide. Next slide. Thank you. How do we evaluate authenticity of the source? Those of us that have spoken about interviews and so on, we are valid, but in historical data, we want to confirm whether the source is authentic, whether it lacks the determining how valid data are. Secondary data, you can talk about authenticity in terms of authorship and so on and so forth. So we go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, when we talk about historical data, whether primary or secondary, one thing is clear, that none of us was there when this data were generated. And therefore, what we all attempt to do is to attempt to reconstruct the past activities based on data that are left behind by those that were there directly or those that were not there. So reconstruction and interpretation of historical data do not easily enhance absolute or relative objectivity in history. Secondly, remoteness of the historical researcher from the event creates the challenge of accuracy and interpretation. And that being the case, for us to summon these challenges, we need to put on what we call our garment of positive skepticism, which means that researchers should doubt their own findings and those of others. As producers and as consumers of research, we should not believe everything we read. We call this positive skepticism. This term does not mean unyielding disbelief, but rather the habit of checking the evidence. Skepticism requires us to distinguish poor research unworthy of our belief from good research which deserves at least professional acceptance. That is the hallmark of historical research. Thank you as I end this presentation.
Chooks?
I believe Prof.
It's quite enthralling, eh?
Hello, Prof.
So he's done. Go on next.
I'm done. I don't want to keep others waiting. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, Chooks. I'm over with my presentation.
We can hear you, Chooks. Technology.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chooks.
I'm still here, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for also the very topic is to be taken by two people, and the first person has done it. The second person that will now take it is Professor Victor Ayedu Aluma, Professor of Mass Communication and Social Change at the Department of Mass Communication, University of Jos, Nigeria. Aluma holds the PhD in Communication at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and is an alumnus of the International Institute for Journalism in Germany. His research, interests, and publications focus on the content, systems, and influence of communication in Africa. He has developed and taught courses in broadcast and digital journalism, cultures, and communication in leading Nigerian universities. He is a recipient of the Certificate of Appreciation of the Human Development Initiatives in Nigeria and the life membership of the Indo-Nigerian Film Association. Aluma is a member of the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria, ACPSN, and an art music enthusiast.
He comes to this event with such a rich background. Thank you so much, Prof, for coming. Welcome you to deliver this last part of the presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, JPDS, for the invitation. Thank you, Professor Gapsiso, for reminding me of the time we had together in Maiduguri. I still remember the landscape from the air. Thank you, Professor Okibo, for inviting me. Incidentally, reminds me of my relationship with the Okibo family, extended family. Starting with reading the works of Christopher Okibo, still appreciate his technique in poetry, and then the work of Dr. Pius Okibo, his magisterial work, historical study of economic development planning in Nigeria going back to the 1900s. The two of them have now joined our history. They've become ancestors, as we say. Also, Professor Charles Okibo, his contribution in communication studies is, I don't need to recount it, but one of the things about him that gets me is his winning smile. And then Victor Okibo, the only book of poetry that I ever published, he did a cover for it. I ended up not using the cover, but I always remember with gratitude. I'm touched by the fact that in those days, when we were very poor artists, he could do such a thing gratis, as design a cover. And then today I'm meeting Karen, great speaker. I'm sure it's going to be a great intellectual. I understand Karen is an abbreviation of, is a variant of Catherine, but I also understand it's the name of an ethnic group in Asia. So one of these days when we meet, I'm going to ask her to prove, quote unquote, prove that she isn't Asian. All right, so I have about 10 minutes to talk about historical method. Next slide. I'll talk about these, I'll deal with the topic under these 4 headings: introduction, historical data analysis, reconstruction, and report writing, and then a conclusion of sorts. Next slide. Okay, so greetings. And here I state my task. Good thing is that Professor Olatoji has ably dealt with part 1, which included nature and sources and significance and limitations. And to do the easier task of part 2, which includes historical data analysis, and then reconstruction and report writing. Next slide. Okay, a little clarification about my pedagogical philosophy. I presume I'm in a conversation with fellow students. I know that some of these quote unquote students are very distinguished. And some like me are not really well known. But the point is we're all students, and our aim is to find out what is true in the realm of knowledge about our topic. And the presumption is that what we do in the tradition of the best of scientists is falsifiable. So I'm going to be saying things that I know you are probably going to say is not actually very correct. and I'm willing to learn. I have my pen here to jot down the corrections. Next slide. Okay, so historical data, and over the next 3 slides or so, I'll be taking a broad view, summary view of what data analysis in history is. Begins with, you have your data. The nature of that has been explained in Professor Latoji's variable presentation. And then first step is that ensure that they fit within a research as argument schema. That was originally put forward by Toulmin, British philosopher, and then put in a book that has meant a lot to me by Merrigan and Austin, academics in communication studies. The idea, summarize it, research as argument schema says your data should or should not support your research claims, provided your warrants are sound. So 3-legged thing. Toulmin's thing is more complicated than that, but Merrigan and Austin give this simplified version that we can start with that is useful. So 3 legs, data, claim, warrants. Next slide. So I'm saying that this schema applies to historical data. I won't go into the quote unquote argument about whether history is a form of science or is a form of humanities, but I'll just go on and say that I believe that this 3-part schema works for historical data analysis. Second step is organize your data into conceptual categories. I call them brown boxes. Those categories, those boxes are derived from your claim. Next slide. Third step is that you've got to then set up connections or logical connectors between the categories. Quick illustration of what that means. An example here, I put the logical connectors in bold. So in practice, it would work something like this. If X, then Y. You'll have time to we'll have time to look at that more later. Next slide. Okay, about 3, starting from here, the 3 slides that follow gives an example of this 3-step way of analyzing historical data. I'm going to skip them and come back to them if we have enough time in the time that I have. So next slide. Next slide. Okay. Okay. Historical. Okay. Still next slide. This is the 4th of this illustration. So next. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm taking a look at it. Okay, this is still part of the illustration. Okay, now I come to reconstruction and report writing. There's a definition of reconstruction. That's a plain dictionary definition. It's that a reconstruction is an impression or a model of a past event that is formed from available evidence. That is as clear as you can get about what a reconstruction is. So how does reconstruction fit into the historical research process? Basically, that historians, for instance, if I wanted to write something about the life of Christopher Okigo, for instance, I would be working with the facts I can get, and I would be putting them together to fit a narrative about his life. That would be a reconstruction, basically. So 3 points about reconstruction that should be noted. One is that it's a mental construction of the researcher. 2 is that it's built out of factual evidence. And 3, the meaning of evidence really is that the facts fit into the scheme logical scheme generated by the researcher's claim. I guess another word for claim would be to say a thesis, or a statement, that embodies the knowledge that the historical researcher has to give about his study. Next slide. Okay, primary issues in report writing. So we reconstruct and then we write the report. The primary issues have to do with structuration and narration, two key concepts. And then secondary issues have to do with the character of the language. Is it accurate? Felicity? Is it fluent? Next slide. Okay, what's structuration? Structuration is how the historian organizes the raw materials of history. So how the raw material of history, of data, can be, historical data can be organized. One is a cause-effect kind of organization. Another is a spatial organization. Another, which we are very used to, is the chronology. One of the history books we studied in university, Nigerian press history, was by Increase Coker. That was a strictly chronological structuration. And then narration deals with the storytelling techniques. One of the more captivating historians from storytelling technique is Basil Davidson. It's almost like you are reading a novel when you read Basil Davidson. But the storytelling technique is an important consideration in writing your report. Next slide. Okay, so conclusion of sorts, I said. It's a conclusion in which I invite you to falsify some of the statements I've made, and so that we can amend them and so it can work for us. Okay, that's my timer going off.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much. If you go to the next slide, okay, I said Dalu there. I'm trying to practice my Igbo. But there's something there I can't see here. It was in the update I sent. It's about 3 slides of material that I think are useful for anyone who wants to do history. Examples of historical studies, including one by Michael Echero, Victorian Lagos, using newspaper from 19th century Lagos to reconstruct the cultural life there. So about 12 examples I gave in that update. So thank you. We'll take questions.
So thank you so much, Professor Luma, for this one. We're grateful you did it approximately the same time. So we're moving to question and answer session and comments. We're ready to take them. We see hands.
There are some questions in the there are questions in the chat. Do you want me to read a couple?
Absolutely. Please pick the ones that you think we can attend to briefly in the next 10 minutes.
All right. So there is one, and this is for Karen. Karen, the question is from Anne Odo. And she asks, Karen, can an ethnographic study be carried out using both participant observation and either in-depth interviews or focus groups? Karen?
I responded to this in the chat, but I'll say it here.
Fantastic.
Others didn't see the response, but yes, absolutely. So the more methods you're able to use, the more tools that you're able to use in your ethnography, the better it is in helping you triangulate the findings that you're finding.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We've got Maku Babatunde. Maku, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, good evening and good afternoon, everyone, our resource persons in the house and the organizers of this wonderful academic program. Once again, my name is Maku Babatunde. My questions goes to Professor Gabsiso. My apology if I didn't pronounce your name very well. I would like to know, how do we systematically determine a sample size, given the fact that, as you explained, we have different types of FGD, and with different numerical strengths of participants. So if I need to determine a sample size using a particular FGD, how do I arrive at that? And a similar question to our resource person that presented the in-depth personal interview, the doctor, I've forgotten the name now. In a situation whereby I used a mixed method as my research design, and haven't used a survey to gather questions, and there's now need for me to find out more, from my research subjects, and I need to use an in-depth interview. Now, suppose these are students, because you explained that in in-depth interview, there may be need for one to purposely select interviewees that we know that they have that rich knowledge of supplying you with the necessary data that one needs. So in a situation whereby my research respondents are students that I'm not familiar with, how do I eventually come up with, one, the sample size that I would then eventually settle for that kind of an interview? Then secondly, those kind of respondents that I need to select. Then finally, my questions generally is that I would like to know the most common statistical analytical tools for analyzing qualitative data. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, Dr. Gabsiso, do you want to take the first question, and then Dr. Liu will take the next question?
Sorry, I will type out my response because I'm out of the office, and where I am is too noisy.
All right,
So,
sounds good.
yeah.
Okay, so you'll type it out in the chat, and
Yes.
Okay, and Michael, and is Dr. Liu? Are you here, Dr. Liu? Technology has done it again. So we've recorded this, and Babatunde, Dr. Lee will get back to you with an answer. What we like to do is have presenters respond to answers we don't get to in writing, and we'll send that along with the resource. Chooks, over to you.
Okay, any more questions? At least from the floor now that are not written. If we can't have more questions because we are really behind schedule, we can move to the next program.
Chooks, let me drop in just a point of view.
Okay.
Okay, it has to do with writing research reports. For example, in the ethics of research, particularly social sciences and all of that, they warn us not to use names of interviewees. However, in historical research, the more authentic the name is in terms of how people are able to evaluate the name of your source, the more reliable and believable data are becoming, such that when you interview a 95-year-old man who took part in the Second World War, it will give credence to your report if you had his name, his personality, and the context, the background of that person. And that would make your data to be believable and reliable, just so to draw our attention to that issue. So in terms of ethics, it is valid to use names in the reportage of your data. I guess Professor Victor would, I don't know whether you agree with that.
Well,
let's say that.
Hello, Chooks. Okay.
yes, I think he wants to make a comment. Otherwise, we take it as extra information for us today. I didn't know this myself. I've always believed that in interviewing, you don't need to mention the names of the interviewees. But this is historical, and coming from Professor Rotimi, I think. Okay, sir.
Okay, sir. Sorry, no, go ahead. I wanted to ask a question, but I think we can go on because, or rather a comment, but we can go on because we can just round up because I think we are running out of time already. Absolutely,
yeah. Professor Luma, can I go on? You don't have anything to say?
I was just going to, I know that we are really pressed for time now. Just to comment that ethics, the principle for not identifying your sources is basically don't be mindful of the safety, the well-being, well-being of your sources. Generally, when you are dealing with sources whose well-being, whose are not likely to be adversely affected, then it might be an ethical thing to name them. But if they are living sources and they are likely to get arrested, etc., then you need to be careful about calling them by name.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Thank you for that extra information. So we have technically come to the end of presentations, and the next couple of minutes, we'll be taking a vote of thanks from Ogochukwu Abo. But before then, I want to appreciate some people who have been able to attend today's event. I can see in the gallery somebody I respect so much was once also with us at UNN. It was a senior colleague, I think OC and Emeka. I hope he's still here or he has dropped off. Just to say hello, sir, for being around. It's been a long time. And for any other person who took time to join us. So we are pressed for time. So we are going to be listening to the vote of thanks. And the person to give that is Ogochukwu Obobe, a PhD student of mass communication. Obobe, are you there? A brief vote of thanks. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everybody. Happy to be in this webinar program because this is a wonderful session indeed. Anyway, the brevity of presentation is worthy of a commendation. So I would like to thank our distinguished speakers, from Professor Victor Ayedum Aluma to Dr. Karim Okibo, Professor Rotimi Olatunji, Dr. Rahimat Adeniran, Professor Nuhu Gapsiso, and Dr. Rukayat Aliyu. You all did a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for coming through. Your inputs are all enriching. Then to our amiable and well-calculated moderator, Dr. Chooks Enwerem, thank you for your moderation. It's top-notch. And to the organizers of this program, Professor Chinedum Afibomba and Professor Charles Okibo, who worked tirelessly and assiduously behind the scenes to ensure the successful hosting of these webinars. We say thank you. Again, and to the participants, availing yourself to be part of today's webinar, which is actually the last of the 6-part mixed method research seminar series, is a good one. For sure, the presentations are worth it. And I say thank you for having participated in today's program. Thank you very much once again. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Obobe. And last and not the least, I want to appreciate a member of the Jacksonites Professional Development Series, Dr. Marcel Mbamalu, very brilliant and very, very busy professional for finding time to come and to deliver that brilliant welcome address. Not forgetting the members who have been at the back end, making sure that technology is very, very submissive to us today. Appreciate you all. Your names may not be ringing bells, but we know what you're doing. You've been doing so much in terms of creating the content, creating the slides, creating the, the graphics with which you have been able to promote these seminars all these 6 months. Thank you so much on behalf of the Jacksonites Professionals Development Series. I say thank you. I don't know if Prof wants to say something. I'll hand over to her now to finally finalize. Professor?
Thank you so much, Chicks. Nothing more to add. You've done it, and you've done it so well as always. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you to our participants. We look forward to engaging with you again very soon. God bless and stay safe.